Hello, my name's Emily Rhodes. Today I'm really excited to talk to you about At Freddie's by Penelope Fitzgerald. I love Penelope Fitzgerald. I've read loads of her books. I mean, she hasn't written that many books and they're all quite thin, so it's quite easy to have kind of read them all. It won't take you much time and you'll be so deeply rewarded. Have any of you read Penelope Fitzgerald? Do you like her? Do you have a favourite one of hers? I find it really hard to pick my favourites. I love Offshore, I also love The Beginning of Spring, and I was really glad to read At Freddie's. I chose At Freddie's to read now because in many ways it's a celebration of the theatre, and that is something that so many of us have really missed over this past year with the pandemic, of course, closing so many of them and having to watch so much on screens. And I think that what Penelope Fitzgerald really describes so well is the magic of theatre, the moment of performance when she describes the theatre splitting into two halves, the kind of the audience and behind the stage, and then the hush as the curtain comes up and they come together into a whole. One of her characters in the book, Hannah Graves, who's a young teacher from Ireland, kind of lives for the theatre, and there's this moment where she gets to go backstage for the first time, and it's like the greatest moment of her life. So we all appreciated that enthusiasm for the theatre as we ourselves felt quite excited about the theatre returning. So I suppose we should begin by talking about Freddie herself. Freddie or Frida is her technical name, is the force, this incredible old woman with sort of hefty bosoms and a million brooches who presides and rules over her stage school. And she has sort of an incredible amount of charm. She doesn't care at all about money, but she has power, but not money. And one of the things I really liked in the book, is set in the 60s, is that here is a portrait of a woman who can be powerful without being rich and seeks power but not wealth. And today it feels like those two things are so intertwined. It felt quite refreshing to see them as separate entities again. So Freddie's Theatre School is also a home for a real collection of oddball characters. And I don't know about you, but one of the things I love about Penelope Fitzgerald is the way she captures these brilliant eccentrics and sort of squishes them all together into a slightly weird setting, and then something totally unexpected and strange happens. But in here we have the children, who are described as not ordinary children because they're so precocious, these sort of child actors. And then we also have a couple of teachers who come over from Ireland. There's Hannah, who I mentioned, and there's also Pierce Carroll, who we described, one of the readers in the walking book group noticed how genuine and sincere he was. And in fact, he's described as wearing this kind of suit of green, this green tweed suit. And I thought a bit about the word green, and being described as being green, as being kind of naive and innocent, and he has this kind of innocent sincerity to him that's very kind of out of kilter with everyone else, all these other actors who make their living by deception, I suppose. And then there's also, we see some other adult actors, and there's a kind of an accountant and a couple of other sort of minor characters, and they all come together in this stage school. So what I thought I would really talk about here is, there's so many amazing passages we could read out. There's one very special moment where Freddie is writing to the she starts a campaign against the National Theatre, who want to start a stage school as well. And she gets everyone to write letters to the Times to protest against this. And she does this by really conjuring this immense nostalgia and love of the theatre and old things. And that's a really special moment. But to me, I think the most powerful moment of the book is right at the end. And here we have Jonathan, who is by far the most talented child actor, who wants to practice a jump that he's going to have to do on stage in the Shakespeare play King John. And he's already talked to Carol about, you know, how would you jump? Have you ever had to jump off a wall like that? And he decides he's going to practice his jump in the yard at Freddie's. And it's this very sinister moment. Everyone's sort of gone out. Unusually, Freddie's gone out for dinner. You know, it never happens. Carol's gone to the theatre. No one's there. He's left alone. Okay, so I'm just going to read the last couple of pages, really. By this time, Jonathan had been looked out of the Temple School for about an hour. But he had reckoned with this, and at first it did not particularly disturb him. He had intended, if he got too cold, to go inside and scout round for a packet of crisps and to find somewhere to sleep in costumes. There were plenty of drapes and blankets there. That wouldn't do now. Still, he had other resources. Although it would take a certain amount of nerve, there was nothing to stop him jumping down on the street side and getting out that way. The drop was a good bit longer, though, than the one he was doing at present down into the middle of the yard. His object was to get so used to the jump that he could do it without thinking, in exactly the same way every time. The crates he had got hold of from the garden, so the stage school is in Covent Garden, when it was still a vegetable market, were rotten, as indeed he'd noticed when he took them. But by standing on the outside slats and exerting very little pressure, he could manage the top of the wall quite easily. In the morning, there would be someone to come and watch and tell him whether he was right or not. Meanwhile, he went on climbing and jumping again and again and again into the darkness. I just felt that image was so powerful. When we discussed this in the group, we all noted how ambiguous it was. Nobody really knew what would happen to Jonathan. You know, would he jump to his death? Would he injure himself, or would he be okay? This idea of climbing and jumping again and again and again into the darkness. And it struck me that, you know, this incredibly powerful image that I think is partly so powerful because of its ambiguity, because it makes us wonder and worry and sort of hold our breath and with fright almost. It's felt to me to be quite a good parallel or metaphor for the act of performing on a stage. You know, again, you're climbing up onto the stage and you're sort of throwing yourself out there, if you will, into the darkness of the auditorium. You know, you don't see the audience's faces. So that struck me as a good message for a sort of metaphor for the theatre, but it also struck me as something that we might think of in life in general. You know, so much of life is just climbing up and jumping off into the darkness and not knowing how you're going to land and having to find that courage to climb and jump again and again and again. There's a moment in the book where Fitzgerald writes, "Nature is consistently cruel." And I think she shows the cruelty of nature here so well, and in so many of her books she kind of captures how cruel life has been to these eccentric people. But what stops it from being so bleak is this feeling of hope and this feeling that in spite of the cruelty of nature, people kind of bounce back. They climb up again and jump off again, and they keep on going. And so much of this book, to me, felt like this kind of weird balance between kind of hopelessness and hope, and, you know, circumstances going against people, but them somehow continuing in their funny little ways. So yeah, a great book. I don't think it's a spoiler to have read the end. I think you get so much from it before that. I would really recommend, 10 out of 10 from me, and the group in general, we were really positive. There were a couple who were a little more hesitant about it, more kind of so-so, but I think the book, her novels are quite quiet. You have to sort of slip into them before they really get under your skin. They don't sort of blow you away. They're quiet, but they're genius, I think. And I think after our discussion, I hope most of us would at least give it 1 thumbs up, if not 2. So thank you so much. Now, here are a couple of clips from the walk on Hampstead Heath. See you next time.
He was impulsive.
So here we are walking along the Avenue of Limes, which of course turns into Well Walk a little further along. And one of the characters in the book owns a property on where it's number 4 Well Lane in Hampstead. Can you hear the rain? We suddenly had this crazy downpour, but luckily we found some amazing trees to take cover under, and we actually stayed pretty dry. Yeah, it did not feel like May weather. And here we are towards the end, under another tree.